What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Ian Cummings here with my good friend, NFL draft analyst A.J. Schulte. Last week, we started our combine preview. We talked about running backs and linebackers. So if you want to check that podcast out, just scroll back. But today, like we said in the pod earlier, we won't be able to get to every position before the combine. So we're trying to hit some that we haven't hit a lot of, or positions that will be heavily under the microscope this coming week. And today we got wide receivers and cornerbacks, always two positions that are heavily watched at the NFL Combine at Indianapolis. Two very strong position groups with a lot of intrigue this week. So we'll get into that. But first off, AJ, how you doing, man? Happy birthday, by the way, this past weekend. 25. How you feeling?
I feel old. No,
don't say that, because I got a few months on you. Don't say that. Don't say that.
No, but it was good. It was quiet and pretty chill. We did like an all day kind of thing, so it was nice to celebrate. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now that we're both 25, we got to come up with like a catchy name or something, like quarters coverage or something. I don't know. Football, something football themed. We'll workshop it. We'll get it going. We'll work at it for sure. But yeah, today's episode, it's very easy to get lost in analysis here. But hey, it's something that you do need to spend time on, because the NFL Combine, like we talked about a little bit last week, is an interesting part of the process, because it's important for sure. But there's always a question every cycle of how exactly do you integrate it? How fluid or kind of stringent are you with your grades through this event? And wide receiver in particular is a really big one, right? Because everyone looks at the numbers for wide receivers. Everyone looks at the trends and things like that. It's important, don't get me wrong. But real quick, like, we'll start with wide receivers, obviously, and then we'll go to corner, we'll go to defense. But for wide receivers, man, what is your process for the NFL Combine? Because mine has changed as I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with what I'm seeing on film, right? Usually you can do a pretty good job of gauging things like speed, explosiveness, agility on film. You always have a few surprising times here and there. But I think the more that you watch the film and the more that you know what you're looking for, the more confident you are in identifying those things. So that combine results, yeah, there's a range where they can fall into, but it's not very surprising. And then from there, it's more of does their game speed match their testing speed and things like that. That's kind of my process now. I try to be fairly stable with it, not moving guys around too much, but you do cross-check things. Is that how you view the combine as well?
Yeah. The combine should always be a confirmation event of like, I think this guy's going to run a 4.4, and then he runs a 4.4, and you're like, perfect. Okay, that matches the film. It's really good for finding outliers in a sense. And I also think it kind of shows, it's the first event where we can see like preparation, like how much dedication you put into this. Because if you come in and you're out of shape, or you fall below expectations, that's a cause for concern with your draft stock. But by and large, it should be just like a confirmation, like of what you see on film. And only really if it doesn't match, I think that's key to go back and look and just see, like, was there some sort of circumstance? Did he trip on his 40? Did he pull a hammy or something like that you see every year? But by and large, it should only there's a lot, especially in like the public side, and like a lot of online, where people will just like skyrocket after 40, and it's like, he ran a 4.3, he's going to get drafted, and you're like, okay, well, he doesn't play with a 4.3, so we should be a little bit more hesitant on things like that. But I think you kind of wrapped it up succinctly of just what the combine should be used for.
Yeah, it's
as just a boost of the tape, or a confirmation of the tape.
Yep, the tape always maintains precedence for me.
It's king.
It really is. And that's not me trying to take a stance like tape versus analytics. I know film versus analytics always becomes a big debate, and I will
we could do 45 minutes of film versus
if we wanted to. We could. We're not going to open that can of worms today. Hey, maybe we'll table that for another day. But I do think, me personally, and Dalton will get on my case about this too. Like, I'm a notorious fence sitter. So like, even in that discussion, like, I'll sit on the fence. Like, and now, like, analytics are valuable in the right context, but that's the key. The film is the king, right? It's the most important bit of context, because all the answers that you need are on there if you look hard enough, right? So, it's one of those things. I think a little bit of both is good, and the NFL Combine is very good. I think, like you've said, and like what I've said, for cross-checking, right? For covering all of your bases and just seeing, who matches up with what. And you made a really good point too. preparation, right? Not just with the training and the physical fitness, right? But also with the stance, right? Like if you don't have a good feel for your stance, if you're out a little slow getting that kick up, like, or if your knees are a little too high, right? Or something like that, if you're kind of upright, you're not driving as much, those can have a decent effect, enough effect to like change the perception of the time, right? Like a 4.5 gets frowned on compared to a 4.45, right? And that's only 500ths of a
Mhm.
second. So,
Yeah.
things like stance and preparation and training those mechanical things, right, can actually have an impact too. And I think for the three cone, like agility times, sinking, driving, it's even more distinct, right? It's
Yeah.
even tougher. So, proper training can have a very, very strong impact, but then does it translate to the field too? Just an endless, I'm trying to think of the word, that flow chart, of questions that stem off of combine performances that, the combine itself just can't answer. So with that,
Yeah.
a lot of process talk for the NFL combine, but let's get into the players. Let's get into the prospects for the wide receiver class. And real quick, wide receiver, some notable combine snubs. Joshua Cephas, we were talking beforehand, probably the most notable one for me and for you as well. Very productive for 4 years on end at UTSA. I think he measured in at the Shrine Bowl 6'2" or 6'3", maybe a lean 190s, 200. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but he's a tall, wiry guy with some pretty good flexibility, fluidity, route running chops, and I expected him to get a combine invite too. A few others, or one other that comes to mind for me is Jaquan Burton from FAU. But those are the biggest snubs, I think. But most names that people know will be there. And it's going to be a fun group. You got the obvious first round guys, but you've also got a ton of potential day two guys, some guys who could sneak into the top 50, like Roman Wilson after the Senior Bowl. What are you looking forward to most from this wide receiver group at the combine?
Man,
It's a loaded
a
question. I
weird,
know.
a weird one that I'm oddly looking forward to is so much explosiveness out of this group. I think we're gonna have somebody is going to tie or come close to a record in the jumps
Mhm.
out of this wide receiver
Malik
room. Like
Neighbors,
it's there's
vertical man. I am.
neighbors,
Yeah.
neighbors. I think Adunze
Mhm.
is underrated just in terms of like overall athleticism.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be shocked if he hits a 4.3.
Mhm.
I'm not like he's awesome. Xavier Worthy is going to fly out the building. Troy Franklin, like it's like on and on and on and on of guys that you're just like they're gonna somebody I think is going to tie a record
Mhm.
either in one of these jumps in the vertical or the broad. Just there's way too much explosiveness in this group
Yeah.
for somebody not to come
That's
close.
the common theme, right? Explosiveness. I mean, and I feel like we're seeing more of that every year, but this class in particular, there's so much depth with that amount of talent. And then you've got guys like Roman Wilson, again, like we mentioned, like he coming out of high school, I think he ran like a 4.3, like had a 40-inch vertical too. So it's like,
Yeah.
even guys like that, and Xavier Legette, who we haven't mentioned, but his build up too is very impressive. So, it goes all the way down the board. And I think there's guys on day three that will really boost their stock as well. But shoot, man. I mean, let's talk about the top guys a little bit, real quick. What are we expecting from them? Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. as well. You've got Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. Odunze, I love that shout out because I remember me and Dalton were talking about it too on one of our wide receiver pods. But his brand of athleticism is so unique because he's so smooth and fluid, right? It's like it's not the violent explosiveness that you see from Neighbors, for instance, where Neighbors like looks like he has a jetpack on his ankles, right? And he's just going. But Adunze
Yeah.
is such an effortless accelerator and an effortless mover, and it translates to really smooth vertical ability. It's there for sure. It's just not quite as explosive as eye catching, but it's a very functional part of his game. So I'm really excited to see that quantified, but a few others too. I think Brian Thomas Jr. Very interested to see how he tests with his stacking ability, his speed. Keon Coleman, I think, is going to be one that's a little more. There's a little bit more hinging on this for him, right? Because
That's gonna yeah.
the traits are there. We've seen in spurts his Kalen Carson matchup, right, where he visibly showed that acceleration ability to separate. But you wonder how much of that is there to build off of while he's developing as a route runner. Adonai Mitchell, AD Mitchell, another one as well. His matchup against Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? You could see that vertical speed, which he used to gain space on the vertical plane outside the numbers, right? Other guys too. But I think there's a lot of size speed guys who were still trying to get an absolute marker for what their speed is and what it provides, right? The film can guide you. The film is ultimately king, like we said, but a lot of people are going to be watching those numbers in particular. So these top guys, what's the biggest thing on your mind? What are you hoping to answer here?
I think out of everybody, like I don't think any of the top three, like unless they just bomb the combine, all of that's going to be like, yeah, that's I expected that. Like
Mhm.
Neighbors is going to just run out the building. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to test phenomenally in the agilities if he even does them.
Mhm.
That's been a thing where some guys just don't do the
Yeah, for
agilities.
sure.
I'll be interested to see if Keon Coleman does,
Mhm.
because like it's I keep thinking back to like DK Metcalf and how a lot of people made up that three cone, and it hasn't really mattered for Metcalf as much in the NFL. But I kind of wonder if Keon Coleman's going to go. I don't really want to do the agilities
Yeah.
this year. I'll just jump and run, and I think that'll be interesting to see. But like you said, the Brian Thomas Jr. and AD Mitchell, I think that'll probably cement them in the first round conversation. Brian Thomas Jr. is probably already in. AD Mitchell kind of feels like he's on the fence. We know he's a great athlete, but how good is he stacked
Mhm.
up versus that second tier of wide
And it'll be good to
receivers?
quantify him because playing alongside Worthy, right? Anyone is gonna look like a second tier athlete because Worthy's
Yeah.
just insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, but like if you're, yeah, like I think of all those teams in the late 20s who need wide receivers, like the Bills and the Chiefs. AD Mitchell versus Keon Coleman, for example. AD Mitchell could be like, hey, I ran all these. These are my numbers here versus a Keon Coleman type. I feel like that matchup is going to be pretty interesting to see how that develops out of the combine.
Mhm. Yeah, and those are both two guys who overarching consistency can be cited as a potential flaw, right? I think it's in different phases, right? Coleman is such a dominating alpha when he's in the zone, but there are some drops on occasion. And then as a route runner, you know that there's still room to expand the route tree, right? Even though he's shown the necessary footwork, it stems, and the targeted physicality, the hinge flexibility, those things are there, but because it's still work in progress, that athletic profile, that exact athletic pinpointing is going to be so key for him. And then AD Mitchell on the opposite side, right? We know he's a very good route runner for his size. But again, you do see sometimes on film, particularly against TCU this past year, like he'll run hot and cold at times a little bit, right? You want to see a little bit more
Yeah.
consistency. The hands are, a low drop rate. And I think he's shown some really, really impressive flashes of catching and gathering in high difficulty situations, but sometimes gets into his body a little bit, right? So, for both of those guys, there's room to reaffirm their stock with the testing. And like we said earlier, we know they're good athletes, right? The film does that much. But for
Yeah.
teams, it's interesting because you don't want anything to supersede the film, but it is kind of proven at this point over the past few years, right? Teams and relative athletic score. Our guy Kentley Platty, Math Bomb, who does a great job with the MDS, he's really awesome sharing
Yeah.
that every cycle, but that kind of shows trends. And you've seen with the RAS scores, right? Teams do have preferences, and sometimes there's a certain threshold that they don't go below, or things that will
Hmm.
rule out
Yeah.
prospects for them. So for those guys in particular, right? Especially with high capital on the line, that'll be a big deciding factor, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you're going to see a lot of nines
Yeah,
in the RAS
I
this
think
year.
so too.
There's going to be so many nines out of this
Yeah,
group.
it's going to be fun for sure. We've talked about the top guys, but I'm curious to know, and I'll share mine first, and then I'll let you share a few guys whose results may be more elastic for their ultimate draft capital. A few guys. I've got three names that come to mind for me at the wide receiver position. We've got Malik Washington from Virginia. Very curious to see how he tests. I don't think he'll run a blazing 40 time, but I'm really curious to see his explosiveness numbers, because to me, he's pretty explosive, pretty twitched up in the short ranges, but he's just a very, very good football player, man. I mean, he's a really good route runner. Despite his size, I think he plays above his frame. I think he's willing to go into those contested situations. He's a tough player. He's got great hands. A lot of checks that are a lot of boxes that are checked for me. I had those flipped for a second. But yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of boxes that are checked for me as a pure receiver. So I just want to quantify his athleticism, especially being 5'8", 192, right? It's burly, but naturally that limited catch radius is going to affect you. Jalen McMillan from Washington. I really want to see what his 40 time is. I know he's got vertical speed, man, but I'm almost just excited to see him re-announce himself, right? Because I'm a huge fan of Adunze. I'm a huge fan of Jalen Polk, as I'll get to in a second here. But Jalen McMillan, man, I think he gets overlooked sometimes. I know medicals was a little bit of a concern this past year, but going back to his 2021, 2022 tape and when he was healthy, right? This dude actually has legit vertical speed, and he's so good at using it, right? With his route running ability, he's such a sharp, flexible route runner who can press upfield into stems, manipulate DBs, play leverage, and win the leverage game too. And he's so variable with his route running as well. I love the versatility, day one impact as a separator. So I think if we see that vertical speed, that'll just be confirmation for him, right? I really think he gets overlooked sometimes. And then Jalen Polk from Washington. I think, looking at Polk and his profile, and I've said this a few times, but some of the ways that he wins is similar to Puka Nakua, right? You look at a guy who's completely alignment versatile, and that's not a comp. I don't want to get that misconstrued. That's not a comp, but I do think stylistically, from a usage versatility standpoint, this is a guy who's used in motions, rolling into the slot, right? You can play him on the boundary if you want, scheme him rack touches as well. But as a receiver, too, I mean, the bend that he has through stems, the ability to accelerate late in snaps and create that late snap separation, and then really, really good hands, even in high difficulty situations, right? Just a very reliable receiving threat. I don't think he has the top end speed, but if he runs like a high 4.4, that's all I need to see to confirm that and be like, yeah, he's got enough speed like I thought he did on the tape. Like, let's take this guy early. So I think those are three guys for me that I think their combine performance will be a little bit more elastic for their ultimate landing spot. Again, you could go down the list. This wide receiver class is insane, but who are some guys for you that are at the top of your mind that you're looking for? Like, hey, if he runs a certain time, I'm locking this guy into a certain range.
Yeah, Malik Washington is a great shout out. I love him. It feels overblown, but I was like, this guy's Jamison Crowder all over again. Like he's just gonna catch 80 catches a year, and you're gonna be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But for me, another guy, Jamari Thrash
Yes.
out of Louisville, I'm very interested to see that one. Just his overall skill set. You look at, I'm very interested to see, like, is he a true like burner, or is he just more like a 4-4 kind of guy? Just because of how you use him as like a slot receiver, I'm very interested to see that overall athleticism. Maybe not somebody that is going to be elastic, but I am curious to see how Brendan Rice tests. Just because you look at the Senior Bowl, and he just was not separating. I mean, it was rough, but you look at the height, weight, speed profile that he could potentially build off of at the combine. He's still got some buzz about his name. I think Dane Brugler put him in his top 100. And so like there's still some potential there, but if he kind of craters at the combine, I don't know what his stock is ultimately going to look like, because you have a kind of a rough Senior Bowl outing and then a combine for a guy who was here. Kind of, you wonder how did him versus like his teammate Taj Washington end up stacking up and things like that. But another one, Jermaine Burton, out of Alabama, I think is another really interesting guy. He doesn't really get talked about a lot, I've noticed, but what a phenomenal deep threat. I really feel like if he hits a 4.3, we'd be like, yeah, done. That's all I need to see. He's got everything else on film. I really want to see just what he looks like, just going, just no control, just how fast can you truly be? And I think Jermaine Burton's gonna test phenomenal. You watch his film, it's such an excellent deep threat, good route runner,
Yeah, he's a good route
good
runner.
hands. Like there's everything that he's got. I just want to see what that looks like in that environment, because Alabama has produced so many wonderful wide receivers. I really feel like he can be the next one in line.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this. Is great because I've got guys that are at the top of my head, but there's so many names floating around in there. I've used this analogy with Dalton, but it's like that lotto ball sphere, like they're bouncing around, and sometimes they pop in and it's one name, but I can't get to all of them right. And then you fill in the gaps for me. I remember thinking like Jermaine Burton. All right, this is a good opportunity for him. But you're absolutely right, because he's a speed guy. He's a great route runner. He's got good hands, right? I think as a rack threat too, he's really good at resetting really quick after the catch. He's got the traits to produce there. This could be a moment where, and it feels weird. Usually Alabama guys, we're talking about them a lot, usually.
Yeah.
And with Jermaine Burton, it hasn't happened yet. I think this is where that catalyst where, all right, we really start to kind of wise up and like, hey, let's stop ignoring this guy, because he's also.
Hey, Bama's got a wide receiver, guys. Like,
exactly.
Newsflash. There's another
Newsflash, right? It's like, hey, just making sure you guys are up to speed here. Like Crimson Tide, it's still going. So I really like his speed and route running. And I mean, we've talked about it before, but guys who have speed and know how to use it as route runners, Xavier Worthy is the top example in this class, but there's more to that too. So I'm a big fan of his. I'm really excited to see what he can do. Are there any other small school under the radar guys that are at the top of your head as guys that could make themselves known? I know there's a few small school guys at the combine this year, Jalen Coker, Ryan Flournoy, both those guys with the all-star circuit, but there's a few more dotted in there as well. So any other guys that you want to shout out before we start the transition to corner?
Tavion Robinson out of Kentucky. explosive. You go back to the 2022 film and you're like, holy crap, he's erasing angles like crazy. This year, kind of a little bit more quiet year, but I he's definitely one that I'm keeping an eye on. It's not small school, but Ladeatrick Griffin out of Mississippi State
Mhm.
is another guy that could just absolutely fly. Like I think you're talking about an NFL like stud returner right away. I'm very interested to see like how well he tests because I think that could put him like firmly on the NFL like late day three radars of just because you look at the film and it's he's just blowing by everybody. He's a former corner turned wide receiver, just like the speed, and he was a I think All American returner last year. So like everything that he does is so freaking fast.
Mhm.
I can't emphasize enough just how much I actually really enjoyed his game. But I feel like this would be a good event for him to really break out onto the scene. It's like, hey, wait a second, who is this guy? And get people to go back and watch his film.
Nice. And he was the guy at the Shrine Bowl too, who was really using that speed to separate as well. So I love all those shout outs. I love that. And I think that, this wide receiver class, people are starting to, we know it's deep, but I think this will start to, rightfully quantify just how deep it is at multiple levels too. Like you've got the first round, second round depth, you got the top 100 depth, and you have that day three depth guys who you could get late and actually provide value for you on an NFL roster too. So Brendan Rice is a good one as well. I think for we were talking about him as a more fluid one, but I agree about the Senior Bowl performance. I think he built up through the week, but you're right. Not a great separator. I'm more curious to get his 3-cone time if he runs that. I'm not sure if he will, but I'm really going to be watching for that because we know he's got the vertical athleticism, but can he separate? That's the big question. And with a few of these bigger guys too. So it's going to be fun. And there's a few other names that we didn't even touch on, right? Malachi Corley, Lad McConkey, the guys who we probably know they're going to have speed and burst, but it's just like, quantifying it within this class is going to be so fun. One more before we get to the corner, and this will probably be an easy one, but let's assume everyone runs the 40. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. will run faster than people expect. I think he's going to be a freak, but assuming everyone runs the 40, who do you think runs the fastest time? Probably Xavier Worthy, right?
Worthy, an underrated name I'm going to throw in here. It's going to be Jacob Cowing.
Jacob
I
Cowan,
think I think
Arizona.
I think I think Cowing, if you just that natural acceleration that he
Yeah,
has on film, I think he's going to put out a good showing.
and
Jaquan Jackson out of Tulane is
yes,
another
yes,
one
that was another
that'll
one.
that'll absolutely be up there.
Nice. Yeah, I like those a lot. Calvin, he's got that featherweight frame, but like you said, I mean, it's effortless with him. It really is. And then Jaquan Jackson, the Senior Bowl was fun for him because they won leverage awareness, could have improved, right? But I think he did. He grew throughout the week, and he's got that hyperactive, high energy athleticism, both with his burst, his twitch, agility. So a lot of names. That's the baseline lesson here. A lot of names, almost too many to know, but we tried to cover as much as possible for the receiver class. The moral of the story is don't leave any stone unturned because there's a lot of talent out there. Let's move on to corner, though. Corner, just not quite as deep, but I still think a very, very deep position group. And it's going to be a fun one. I think there's a little bit more settling to do, right? With the wide receiver class, we're pretty certain it's MHJ, it's Rome Odunze, or Malik Neighbors, whoever you have at wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3. That's kind of a 50-50 proposition right now, but we know those guys, for the most part, are going to be the top 3 guys. And then after that, too, Brian Thomas Jr., pretty certain he'll be a first rounder, right? You've got A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, guys that are in that conversation and are pretty solidified there. Corner is not as settled, right? I mean, there's still a top group, I think, but I think the order is a lot more variable across the board. Terrion Arnold is obviously a CB1 candidate. He's my personal CB1 after his growth this year. But you've got Nate Wiggins, right, who really could blow the roof off the 40 time. Again, you've got Cooper DeJean, right, who's probably going to test very well as well. Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, right? This guy could be rising into the CB1 conversation as well. And there's other guys too, like TJ Tampa, man. I'm a big fan of his. I think that size, speed, athleticism is really going to shock people. Kamari Lassiter from Georgia, right? The list goes on and on. First impressions for the CB position at the NFL Combine for you.
Yeah, I really there's like you were talking about the order. It's just not set at
Yeah.
all. I feel like this is a good chance for guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, who came into the year almost viewed as a consensus cornerback one, kind of like vying with Nate Wiggins and maybe Cooper DeJean a little bit, but has seemingly kind of gotten forgotten a little bit in that conversation, but I feel like this is a good chance for him to come out and be like, "Hey, I'm still here. Like
Yeah.
I'm still a first round guy. Like you know my name. I'm another Alabama corner. Newsflash. Like put another one into the pros." But like especially, I also really like this as a coming up part. I think you Quinyon Mitchell. I think that's a good shout out as well. But also for guys like Ennis Rakestraw in those that next tier of corner to really step up and put themselves firmly in that radar as well. The combine is a great tool for that because a lot of people watch it. There's so many eyes on the combine every year, especially for corner. I think if you see him, you just look at the natural athleticism that he plays with. I think he's going to test very well, and we're going to start to see him like definitely firmly start to put himself in that end of round one, like top 40 conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, he's one of those guys who's pretty press man oriented, off man oriented, but the speed, the foot speed, the fluidity, right? All of those things are big plus traits for him, right? So I'm really excited to get that quantified because you are right. He's a guy who's kind of felt like he's on that top 50 fringe, and that's kind of where he is for me, right? But he's also a guy who I could see getting more first round buzz, and he's gotten a little bit, but getting more with a good combine. I think that's really going to help him. This top group, man, though, I'm very excited to see Terry and Arnold test because that dude, just the way he moves is just different. I mean, just the explosiveness, the hinge fluidity as well, but the foot speed, the twitch, the explosiveness. I mean, if he goes through everything, I expect him to put up some major numbers. Nate Wiggins, there have been rumors that he ran a 4.2 as just a warm up test for what he was training. Now we gotta preface it's misinformation season, right? People are putting numbers out there, right? The
Right.
vertical speed does show up on tape, but what is he going to run? That's a different conversation. But I could easily see him running 4.3s and maybe 4.2. I know sometimes the NFL Combine, like we've said at the very start, if you prepare well enough, right? If your form is good, there is a chance you can magnify your time a little bit. So Nate Wiggins will have that vertical speed. I think TJ Tampa, again, I think there's definitely room for him to re-announce himself, right? Because he's got the frame, he's got the ball skills as a former wide receiver. I think that 6'2", 200-pound frame is really it's going to separate itself more than it would have last year with guys like Julius Brents, Christian Gonzalez, right? That last year's class
Yeah.
was a lot more dense with longer guys. But this year he'll have a chance to separate himself. And then going down the list, man, who are some other guys kind of in the top 75, top 100 range, top 125 even we could go, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of talent, right? You can just keep going down the board,
Yeah.
but Max Melton is one. Kyrie Jackson from Oregon, right? 6'3", I think 197. He had a pretty good Senior Bowl showing too, but that vertical speed is there on tape for him too. So I think if he tests well,
Yeah.
people are going to look at that like 6'3" speed, top 100, just like that, right? So, that day two group, as we get farther and farther down, so are there other names that are standing out to you?
Maybe not like an outright
Mhm.
that he's going to test out the building, but I am very curious to see Kamari Lassiter.
Yeah.
Just to like what is his athletic profile going to look like? I just because you watch him fundamentally, he's awesome. Great awareness, smarts out the building, instincts, like all of that. Every single box is checked, but you wonder like how fast is he really? Like what is his natural athleticism going to look like? I feel like this will be a good chance for him to really affirm his status in that top because he's kind of going in the top 50 of mocks, but if he tests poorly that could drop and vice versa. He could cement himself up there. um I'm interested to see Cam Hart because you touched on it with Kyrie Jackson as well. He and Hart were the only two guys at the Senior Bowl that were like over, I think, over 6 foot.
Mhm.
They were the only two corners there that were that size. And Cam Hart, when you watch him on film, it's like such a natural press man corner. Just long, great physicality, good footwork out of his stance, like everything that translates well. I really just want to see what that overall athletic profile looks like because he's huge, he's long, and if he comes in with an absolutely good combine, you're definitely going to see him be put in the top 100. I think just awesome, awesome player.
Yeah, and I think he played at some different alignments at the Senior Bowl too, so showing that ability to move around. And listening to him in interviews, very well spoken. Seems he's an intelligent player that shows up on his film too. He'll trigger quickly and run support. So the size is there, and I do believe he was on Feldman's Freaks at one point with I think like a 40-inch vertical, maybe 4.3 something, 40-yard dash. So there's a verified source out there that says Cam Hart is a freak athlete. So we'll see. It
Yeah.
definitely shows up on the film. But yeah, I think those two guys, Kyrie Jackson and Cam Hart, to me, I think they have a lot to gain from testing well. Because I think if you do that, there aren't a lot of guys in this class who check those boxes as a size speed guy, right? Like
Yeah.
definitively having
Definitely.
that. A few other guys that are kind of, I'm interested to see what happened with DJ James from Auburn. That's another one, but I think I want to see if he can pack on some more weight because he was around
Yeah.
170 at the Senior Bowl. So
Yeah.
if he can add some weight, get a little more mass, like coming at 175, maybe a little bit heavier. I don't need him to be 180, but because I know it's a little unrealistic for a leaner guy like that. But on film, he's got speed, he's got twitch, he's got explosiveness, right? He has all those things. So I want to see
Yeah.
if he,
Very
yeah,
competitive.
very competitive player who plays beyond his frame too. That was something that I really appreciated in run support, right? A guy who's willing to get ahead of blocks, obstruct running lanes on the boundary. So I want to see if he can put on mass and retain that athleticism. That'll be big for me. And then another guy that I think we should talk about a little bit is Kalen King from Penn State, because preseason,
Hmm.
right? You saw mock drafts where he was going round one, and I had a pretty solid grade on him. I had kind of a fringe day one grade on him coming into the year, but I thought he was a guy who you could kind of tell that the elite size athleticism combination that Joey Porter had per se was not there with Kalen King. And, that was obvious. But I feel like there were a few matchups through the year and at the Senior Bowl, too, where it was made a little bit more distinct, that lack of vertical speed, right? That lack of elite vertical speed, I should say. It's not like they're getting a mile of space on them, but that little lack of top end speed that can create that light snap separation for wide receivers. And it kind of it lowers the margin for error for a corner like Kalen King. So but it's one of those
Yeah.
things, like, you can tell it's there on tape. So if he inexplicably runs a 4.3, like, I'm gonna say he's still got to play up to that, right? But he's another one where I'm really curious if he can get in the yellow, right? If he can run a 4.5, decent explosiveness numbers, like, that'll be enough for him to kind of weather the storm, I think. But I'm a little scared because if he runs a little bit slower or doesn't have that elite, some elite categories at least, like, we could be looking at a even bigger slide for him.
Yeah. It was really strange to see because you coming into the year and you're just like, wow, he's another Penn
Yeah.
State just dude on defense. And then this year he really, really struggled. I thought those other Penn State DBs had better tape this year. It's a tough case of 2022 versus 2023 and really measuring that. But I think you made some good points of just like how much is his testing really going to impact it. But I would also caution with him, like Penn State guys always test like freaks.
Mhm.
They have always done so. And so I'm kind of a little bit hesitant to say like if he tests well, it answers every question, just because like how that doesn't necessarily match up with the tape every single time. Penn State guys just always test out the building. They're always putting up high numbers. So it's going to be a tricky one to evaluate, but it I don't make the pay grades for picking these guys. I just sit here and talk about them. So
Yeah, which I'm sometimes I'm thankful for because I got some misses in the bank for sure. But no, I'm kidding. I there's yeah, I mean, they're gonna test the, and we won't have a chance to have a specific episode on like edge prospects per se, but Adisa Isaac, Chop Robinson, again, watch them just blow the roof off the combine. It's what Penn State players do.
yeah,
So yeah, it's just kind of what they do. It's kind of a trend at this point. So that training facility, that training staff, and that kind of plays into some of these trends too, where you need to identify those things and then kind of pinpoint on the tape, do they play up to or below those numbers, right? And is there a way
yeah,
technically for them to glean more of that athleticism, right? Are there technical deficiencies, or is this just a guy who simply doesn't play as fast as its numbers? So maybe the testing athleticism is kind of an anomaly, right? So that's something you have to sift through too. But some other names at corner that are coming to mind, and we can get into this day three group because I feel like the day three group for corner is insanely deep, and that kind of was brought to the forefront at the Senior Bowl, right? Guys like Andrew Phillips from Kentucky played really well. I think he's got some slot versatility. Carlton Johnson from Fresno State, right? Another guy who's a little bit lighter, but you do see the closing speed when he's clicking and closing, right? Like,
fly.
he can
Yeah,
fly. So it's one of those things where, and then other guys too, like Renardo Green from Florida State. Admittedly, I need to watch more of his tape, but from everything I've seen, I need to do a deep dive and a scouting report. But from everything I've seen, I think he might be a really underrated player in this class. He really went toe to toe with Malik Neighbors, competitive, again, fleet footed, had a really good Shrine Bowl performance. He's got size and some play strength to him as well. Kamal Haddon from Tennessee is one that gets overlooked at times too. I think he's a
Yeah.
really long guy who's got some explosiveness to him as well. So Elijah Jones from Boston College, another one that I like a lot, a little bit longer, but kind of lean. He's going to be a 25-year-old rookie, but that Florida State game, man. I mean, he was going up against Keon Coleman out of the slot, Johnny Wilson on the boundary, and he's not giving a step. So you love to see that too, those little barometer games where it's like against this top end athlete, he did not let up. And so I think there
Yeah.
are a lot of names to sift through, a lot of volume in the back end of the CB class. Who are you kind of pinpointing there as a player who could rise the stock?
Haddon is a great shout
Mhm.
out because you look at his film early on, extremely productive this year for Tennessee. Phenomenal. Tennessee's defense this year as a whole, I felt like was had some really phenomenal dudes.
Mhm.
But he gets hurt in October, season-ending injury, and he kind of falls under the radar. And now, yeah, I hope he's healthy enough to give it a fully
Yeah,
go. I don't
that'll
I
be
don't know what his injury status is, but I assume if he got an invite, that there definitely is at least some NFL interest in terms of seeing how his medical stack out and seeing if he'll test. But I think that's a guy that if he comes out and he's testing well, I think he's firmly going to put himself probably even closer to day two, just because you look at his film early on this year, and it's awesome stuff, especially in the SEC. I think you look at that physicality, the production he had this year is going to stand out. I really that's a great shout out on your part. I was actually thinking of talking about him, but another guy. I'm very interested to see the pit corners
yeah.
because I like both of them, especially is it Devonshire or Devonshire?
MJ
I'm not sure.
MJ Devonshire, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched his film beforehand, before the Shrine Bowl. I really like the fundamentals he plays with. I want to see how athletic he really is, but I think that's like a starting zone corner right away.
Mhm.
Um, I'm very interested to see just how well another guy that has risen over the offseason, Jarvis Brownlee.
Yes, I was gonna bring
I
him up.
I
Yeah.
he's so freaking competitive. Like he just that tough, the competitive toughness. He's very reminiscent of Jair Alexander in that he's going to let you know he's on the field no matter what. He's going to talk at you. He's going to fly down the field in the run game, like just a overly competitive corner. And you look, I think the movement skills are there, the explosiveness is there, but I think this is going to be a good outing for him to put himself probably closer to the top 100 at this point. I would say he's risen to that point, and a good combine is just going to keep skyrocketing that.
Yeah, I think with the composite profile that he has, right? And there are a few concerns I have. I think he can get a little overzealous sometimes, and then technically there are some bad habits to break that do repeat with his footwork. But the dude is so twitchy, energetic in the short ranges, right? He's so competitive, like you said, so tenacious as a support defender and at the catch point, and he can play the slot or the boundary, right? Looking at that profile, that willingness to play different spots and the ability to impose your will at different spots too, I think that could definitely endear him to some NFL teams. So then all it comes down to is, do you test well, right? Because he's not the biggest guy, but he does have pretty good proportional length for his size. I think he was close to 32-inch arms at around 5'10 or something, or 5'11. So, again, kind of a similar frame to Max Melton from Rutgers, who, has the compact frame to sink and redirect efficiently, but also has the disruptive range with his length to bat down passes and make an impact on the football. So you love to have that combination. It's a very good thing to have, and I'm excited to see if he can distinguish himself a little bit more here. But any other names for you that you want to bring up in the CB class? One that I forgot to mention in the top 75 range was Kalen Carson from Wake Forest. I think he gets
Hmm.
flushed out a little bit sometimes because there's just so much talent in that range. And that game against Keon Coleman in particular was one that I think he'd like to have back. I think there were a few times where he got beat with targeted physicality, or maybe oversetting a little too much on those releases, right? But his short area athleticism, in particular, I want to see his explosiveness and agility. I don't think he has top end vertical speed, right? But I think one thing that's a really big strength of his on tape is dictating reps with his footwork and press man, using feet first, but also targeted jams to, kind of obstruct receivers and delay their releases, right? When he's in control, he's very good. And he's got pretty good closing speed too, click and close ability, kind of hinging down on those comeback routes. So I'm really interested to see how he tests. But any other names for you? And we can talk about the snubs real quick too. Some of the top snubs. I know Quantez Stiggers from Toronto has a really good story, man. I mean, he was a guy who I think dropped out of college early when his father passed away, and got back to football in the fan controlled football league, and then actually earned an opportunity with the CFL as a CFL rookie, became an All Star. I think the Rookie of the Year, right? And that earned him a Shrine Bowl invite, and he was the best player at the Shrine Bowl. So I would have hoped that he would have gotten a combine invite, but he's a guy who's trending up, could be a middle round pick. Jarius Monroe from Tulane is another snub that I like a lot off his Tulane tape. And then I think he was 6'2, 205. He was playing corner and safety at the
Mhm.
Shrine Bowl. Another explosive, competitive, physical guy. And then Quinton Newsome from Nebraska is another one that I want to bring up. He was another 6'1" guy, really long, shows off good ball skills, physicality on tape at Nebraska. So he's another one who I think could be a sleeper. But any other names that you want to give a shout out to before we start to wrap this up here?
Yeah, a couple of the day three guys, Miles Harden out of South
Yeah,
Dakota, I think is one that I want to see how he stacks up. We saw him again at the Shrine Bowl. I thought he was pretty good down there, and I kind of just want to see what his overall athletic profile looks like because I don't have a lot of South Dakota tape, but I do. I just kind of want to see
yeah.
what that
And
looks
his
like, and
measurables are kind
then
of interesting because he's around 200, right? So he's a little bit denser,
yeah.
I think, I believe. I'll
Um,
have to double check that, but
yeah, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I can pull them up, but another the Penn State guys, Johnny Dixon and Daquan
yeah.
Hardy. I'm very interested to see. I mean, again, they always test out the building, but Daquan Hardy, I really like his
I
chippiness.
would
I
love
think
him as
he's
a nickel
a
defender. I would love that.
yeah. I think like outright nickel guy right away. I just want to see like, is he going to come in? Is he going to be a little bit bigger than I think he is? Is he going to be like how like what is his fluidity going to look like? I think that's going to confirm just how high he can get drafted. But I think we're talking about a fourth or fifth round guy, starting nickel right away.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I've got circled in that range. Like, hey, if I can get this guy as a starting nickel, like let's roll it back, man, because he's very good.
Mhm.
And while we're on the topic of nickels, real quick, Mike Sainer still very excited to see how he tests as well. He's one of my favorite players.
Yeah.
He's just so physical as well in all phases. But we're almost out of time here, so I'll ask the same question that I asked before because everyone loves the 40 times, right? I mean, there's so much more nuance to the combine, right? Like, don't overlook everything, but everyone loves the 40 times is what people gravitate to. So I got to ask you, which corner do you think runs the fastest 40?
Man, I feel like I'm gonna go with Carlton Johnson.
Carlton
I
Johnson. Oh my God. I love that. I love
I
that.
just he's so freaking. I think he was a former long speed or like track athlete. It just the athleticism and speed that he shows on film, that click and close in the range. I think he's got that for days. I feel like for some reason Cooper DeJean is also going to run like a crazy fast
Yeah,
40
like
that is going to
linear
catch
speed.
people off
He's got
guard.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like he's going to catch people off guard, but I think that's going to. I'm going to stick with Carlton. I think it's going to be
I love that. I love that. Like, I know we talked about his speed, but I had like a few names at the top of my mind, and none of them were Carlson. But
okay.
I love that, man. I agree too. Like, he's got speed. He definitely closes
Yeah,
ground. Like, and he's a light guy too, so he doesn't have a lot to carry in the first place. So he's getting to point A and point B.
yeah,
Yeah, that's fun. And I'll throw out Nate Wiggins, Quinyon Mitchell as well. I think they'll be in the
hmm
top five for
yeah,
sure. And I'll just give one more shout to TJ Tampa because I really think people are still kind of sleeping on his athleticism. And I think once he has room to open up his strides, he can chew up a lot of space too. So, but the bottom line is a lot of athletes at wide receiver and corner. We have about a minute, so about 30 seconds before I got to start my and ramble through my sign off here. So, real quick, AJ, any closing thoughts to lead our listeners for the combine?
Um, be prepared because you're going to see a crazy amounts of athleticism at every single position. This year has phenomenal athletes at every spot of like day one, day two, day three, and even going into some of the undrafted guys. They're going to put up high eights in the RAS easily.
There you go. Be prepared for athletes at the NFL Combine. That's all we got today for our wide receiver and cornerback preview. We will be back with more Combine content, post Combine content, and then for the month leading up to the draft, a lot of good stuff as well. But for now, that is it. Thank you all for listening. As always, peace out. See you next time.